The rule of law is a fundamental concept to the modern West and especially to the United States. In fact, my guest today calls the United States the most litigious nation on earth and asks why it is that while internally the rule of law has an almost religious flavor to it, in the international realm, the United States and Western nations more generally behave as if rules are made for others only. I've got with me again Ali Borhani, a geopolitical strategist and author of the FuturEaly Substack. Ali, welcome back.
Nice to be with you.
Well, thanks for coming online again. And we said we want to discuss this topic that you actually wrote about on your Substack, and I recommend everybody to check it out there as well. Rules for me, but not for thee. How do you interpret this syndrome that the United States exhibits?
First of all, it's wonderful to be back on neutrality studies at the time that this, litigious spirit is on display. As we speak, President Trump is suing BBC for a misedited piece of speech. And I've been preoccupied with this thought for a long time. But in order to put a bit of background into the context, about litigation and the spirit of litigation. I was shocked when I found out that every year there are about 50 million litigation cases in the United States.
15, 1-5.
No, 50.
5-0.
50. Every year there are 50 million cases of litigation in the United States, equal to the entire population of Spain being in courts as plaintiffs or defendants. Litigation at large is about 2 to 3% of America's GDP domestically, believe it or not, mind-boggling. And that means 1 out of 6 or 7 people in the United States have some sort of a litigation. So when you come to think about that, you realize that that spirit is domestically very enshrined. And yet when it comes to global accountability, it has baffled me that the United States has hardly been the, one would say, a counterparty to a global case ever, as far as I remember. There are cases even in the United States, Pascal, the famous case of the coffee in McDonald's where the lady bought a coffee that was too hot and sued the franchise, or this legend of, the gentleman who, the thief or the burglar who goes to the house and injures himself and sues the homeowner. So United States is, not unfamiliar with litigation. But when it comes to global responsibility, it has a paradox, and it has dodged, or maybe hardly anybody took United States to the court. And that is, been preoccupying my head about the spirit of intervention, forever wars, regime changes, covert, now plainly overt with Venezuela, which we will talk about. And the fact that nobody says, hey, United States, buddy, what is this? I'm going to take you to the court. And it started from 1953 in Iran, the throwing of Mossadegh and the democratically elected government of Iran. And then from there, it went all the way to, Guatemala, the covert operations, and, on the back of United Fruits Company's interest, then to, Cuba, which hasn't been successful, then to Bolivia, Che Guevara, then to Chile, then to Ecuador, then to, Venezuela, now Brazil, as well as what part of the 70s interventions in Latin America. But now it's out. Now there is no pretense that, hey, we're just trying to bring democracy. No, we're going to send a warship, and we're not happy. We're going to topple the regime. So the veils of the emperor are off. And that brings about this question that shouldn't there be an accountability for changing the course of the history of nations? And where do we stand in terms of, these interventions of the past And what comes to surface from time to time, whereas the United States has openly acknowledged, for instance, the issue in Iran and the toppling of the regime of in Iran. So it's not like, something that is a myth. It's an open expression by Madeleine Albright, who said, yes, we toppled the regime in 1953. Bad consequences, but. So that is where I think the premise of my paper is about exceptionalism.
Yeah, so the thing is that this exceptionalism reigns and impunity reigns in the international sphere, and right, it's not as if though there had never been a court case. I mean, the most famous one is probably Nicaragua against the United States, in which Nicaragua actually dragged the United States in front of the International Court of Justice for the Contra affair and the U.S. sponsoring basically the an overthrow, a government regime overthrow in Nicaragua, and actually there was a lot of things were not very great with that case, including the some of the rulings, but the court did establish that some accountability is due, right? Such cases in front of international law courts don't happen often. We currently have again one against Israel and so on, and you have them every once in a while also against the US, but overall, they're few and far between, and the consequences are more than dubious because the ICJ, of course, in order to implement any decision, it needs the Security Council. If the parties do not do it like by themselves, and of course in the Security Council we have the United States, but at the same time we have local domestic U.S. courts. And do you know why it is that there are no class action lawsuits against the U.S. governments by U.S. interest groups?
I think, to be honest with you, I think the example you brought up is a very isolated case. In majority of the cases, it's U.S. versus the world, and U.S. preempts. It's like somebody, again, it's very much, to be honest with you, if one wants to draw a metaphor, like the burglar who goes to the house and gets injured and then sues the owner. The behavior of the United States has been one of exceptionalism. From Hiroshima to Nagasaki to campaign of shock and awe in Iraq to Operation Midnight Hammer. There is no sense of like this is wrong, and I think nations alone have very little bandwidth or capacity to act individually against the United States. But where we have arrived, Pascal, is I think there is a growing global, perhaps unease with United States behavior among allies and adversaries. And that is why I think a global class action lawsuit is not about to push United States just to drag United States for compensation only. This is not just, hey, come and pay us. Again, another number for you and your audience, there are roughly about 3 million car crashes every year of whiplash accidents in United States, right? 3 million. The average compensation for whiplash for neck injury in United States is $20,000 because it's from $10,000 to $50,000, right? That's per year. You multiply that, it comes to around 60 billion in compensation for whiplashes every year in United States, right? You apply 70 years of interference of a hit and run geopolitically of regimes around the world and toppling governments and all of that, that comes to $4.2 trillion of compensation. This is not about just redress financially. This is about better rules of driving. This is about that, hey, United States, you come and you topple a regime, but there is much more into this. There is not just, you come and you change a government. The ramifications are decades long. It affects millions of people. There was a case in United States when U.S. took Canada to court in 1938 to 1941. It's called the Smelter Arbitration, in which Canada's sulfur was, discharged in United States, and United States claimed environmental harm and held Canada accountable. So there are even precedents at that level that, hey, you came and you damaged my environment as a nation state, you have to be held accountable as much as a teddy bear neighbor of mine you are, Canada. So what happens to all of those footprints of emissions that ensue in wars, in regime change operations? We're at the cusp of COP30 and climate, right? So there's not just that, hey, United States came and took Mossadegh out, and then, the era of Shah, and then the uh, revolution, and then 8 years of war with Iraq that the United States was directly supporting. So these are decades long operations that leave permanent scars on psyche of millions of people. So for a nation that is so, attached to litigation, to rule of law, and committed to it, to a point that President Trump, the past 4 days, has said, I have an obligation to sue BBC
Hmm.
for for a clip, right? So shouldn't other nations have an obligation to band together as a global South, global majority community? Because in standalone cases, they don't stand a chance. There is no way. Shouldn't BRICS Plus, shouldn't Global South say this is a list of our grievances? Can we tie it to a dialogue, and in which United States at least will visualize what you have done to the course of our destiny and our history and our populace?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The question is what court would actually have jurisdiction?
At the moment, sadly, there is none. But I think there are precedents, and there are alignments that are shaping and taking place. It reminds me of this conversation about Tina. There is no alternative on dollar, right? So we can say, oh, there is no alternative other than, the UN course and all of that. But I think with the climate justice movements that we see, that it's still vibrant, it's still, if you see it, look at happened in COP30 yesterday, that, people came and said, our jungles are not for sale. If you look at advisory opinions of ICJ, as you rightly said, loss and damage funds under the, Paris Agreement. And I think, strategic litigation, international courts and national courts, there is no shortage of very capable American law firms that I'm sure would pick this up. I mean, trust me, if there is anybody to pick this up, it would be an American law firm or an American lawyer or I would say a civil conscious, oriented litigation arbitrator, because it's not going to happen in the courtrooms of Delhi or I don't know.
No, it's also it would be the most efficient way to actually use the US court system for this. But I am pretty sure that something in the in the rule books of the United States stands in the way of that. Because in theory, what would keep an Iraqi victim of a US cluster bomb from suing the military that dropped that cluster bomb on them, right? But I'm pretty sure that there's some paragraph somewhere in the rule books of the US that says, oh, by the way, actions done by the military cannot be used in court cases against the US government, something like that, probably, right?
Well, you're very right, because there is this codified statutes such as U.S. Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act of 1976 and also the UK State Immunity Act of 1978, which says a sovereign state cannot ordinarily be sued in another state's courts without its consent. And that is so mind-boggling. Basically, it's just aching to say that, in principle, a burglar will say in advance that you cannot sue me if I break into your house in your own court, in your own neighborhood, right? But that doesn't take away the onus still. And I want to make it clear, Pascal, this is not just a retribution. This is a matter of generational impact for United States credibility. This is a nation of 350 million people in a world of about 8 billion that has to live. So it's a question of not just conscious, but credibility for Generation Z. So the onus is also on next gen, in my opinion, as to what sort of a world are we inheriting from our policymakers, from our politicians, from our Congress. But to be honest with you, no, there is no court that can today pick on this matter. But that, then again, doesn't mean that we shouldn't ask the question.
No, no, you're absolutely right.
These nations should not come together and say, okay, and you go back to military, and I don't even want to go just to that direction of, depleted uranium and Fallujah and Iraq and little boy that was dropped in Hiroshima and Fat Man that was dropped in Nagasaki, and the names are just mind-boggling, right? But that is not the case. I mean, you look at Pinochet, right? Pinochet was being pushed to be extradited, and so yes, okay, between the tussle between Spain and Chile and UK and all of that, because UK was a great protector of Pinochet, time of Thatcher and all of that. The key question here is, what is United States' role in Pinochet and the toppling of Allende? So not all of this is necessarily related to armed forces. It's covert operations as well. But when they come and acknowledge it, it's just, it's just mind-boggling.
No, but you're right. But the thing is, we've built institutions that are able to curtail the use of violence within our states. And these institutions have been relatively successful. And yes, breaches of law happen, and yes, violence still happens, but overall we figured out ways, and the United States, of course, this rule of law and the ability to litigate is a very important part of that puzzle, but we haven't figured out how to do that on the global scale for the 8 billion people. So in a sense, if we managed for victims of violence abroad to have access to the courts of the country that inflicted the damage, well, that would change the game. So and that would be actually an efficient way of changing the game, because the system's already there, it's already in place, and we already know that it works because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, as you just said. So question is, how do we open that?
Well, I think there are precedents there as well. If you remember, after Iraq occupied Kuwait, the global courts pushed Iraq in a multi-year compensation package to give $52 billion to Kuwaitis to about...
But those are international courts. It's not a domestic court.
No, I agree with you, but what I'm trying to say is that there are even precedents that, hey, you come and occupy a country, right? Or you attack a country, you have to pay compensation, right? So why doesn't the same apply when it comes from a great power to a smaller nation, right?
Because they have the bigger bombs.
No, that's yeah.
It's very sad, but that's the point.
I know, but
the United States even has a law that allows them domestically to go and invade The Hague if necessary, if ever a U.S. person or an ally was kept by the ICC, like was incarcerated by the ICC. That's how far the domestic laws of the United States shield the U.S. Ability to project force outside.
I hear you, but I think we're entering a multipolar world. That era of post-Cold War is over. Cold War is over. And I think, as Martin Luther King said, the time is always right to do what is right. So I think the timing is matter as well. There's no pretense, as I said, when United States sends warships to coasts of Venezuela, that they say we open. Even allies are cringing and cringing and saying, "What is this?" I mean, you had the case of Canada, Greenland. So I think the timing is right, and that is one of the elements. And again, back to environment and COP30, which we're in the midst of it. Many of these operations are not just about the kid without the limb or the issue of the eroded cities and hundreds of thousands of houses and factories, etc. It's about soil degradation. It's about climates and temperatures that in southern parts of Persian Gulf and southern parts of Iran and Iraq, all the marshlands are gone. All the biodiversity is gone. The temperatures are in summer and months of July and August recording above 50% in cities. 50%. 50 Celsius, sorry, 50 Celsius, above 50 Celsius. An increase of 4.5, 5 degrees over the past 20 years. This is mind-boggling. And when you talk to people who are in the know, they say, yes, of course, I would say environment has been brutalized, bastardized, the soil contamination. Then you have refugees and migrants as a result of all of these things. Then they come to the shores of Europe in dinghies and in boats, and oh my God, all of our malaise is because of the refugees who are coming. But we don't go upstream and say, what is the impact of these actions and how is this affecting us as collective? Genetically modified organisms, geopolitically modified interfering. It's
Yeah.
not good for the health.
No, it's not at all, not at all. Which is why we actually would need to have some solutions for that. But as acts of violence, acts of ecological damaging, as soon as they step over the border, as soon as they touch the international, they become way more difficult to get a handle on through the courts. Although, like, on the small scale, you have ways to do that. I mean, actually, we have ways to deal with international companies, right? We through the treaty systems created, through the litigation ways available in these different jurisdictions, including ideas like universal jurisdiction, that one state can, if there's an entity on their soil, they can even if it's not on their soil, they can pick up cases against an entity if it is established that this is a for instance a universal human rights issue. But it becomes much harder to do those with the governments. And what would be, for instance, you're residing in the UK. I mean, are you aware of cases in which local groups picked up a case against another state within the UK?
Not, I mean, you have the case of, for instance, colonial reparations of Mau Mau that UK paid, a symbolic fee of 20 million, to victims of torture in Kenya. I mean, some of these figures are even a joke. It's not just about the money, as I said, the UK case of the UN case of Iraq and Kuwait. I don't know of it, but I don't think that you should search for those and such cases among the Western allies or the vassal states as well, because they are part of the bystanding ensemble. So it's not like, I would say, Iraq in particular, it was something that it was just United States. No, it was very much brewed here as well. But what I want to say is that we have to move from culpability to accountability. And when you think about, this idea of terrorism, that terrorism is horrible and terrorism is the use of force and coercion to impose a political change, right? It's horrible, in my opinion. But then regime change is, in my opinion, the most institutionalized form of terrorism.
Yeah.
Because it's done under the flag. I come and I say, okay, this is, and that leads me to somewhere that I like to talk a bit with you about this whole idea of mental health. Particularly the past quarter of a century, it has become a growing issue, particularly because young men and women in their full innocence are sent to these battlefields and they come back with post-traumatic stress disorder, and they become scars for their nations in the United States, in all of the Western countries who went to these adventures. But we forget that PTSD doesn't belong only to the veterans who come back. PTSD is for the people who have been subject to these aggressions for generations to come. PTSD is not just post-traumatic stress disorder, but also pre-traumatic stress disorder. When United States swaggers this Damocles sword that we may hit you, we may hit you, we may attack you, we may obliterate you, campaign of shock and awe, the cortisol levels among human body. If there was a case through AI to measure what is the cortisol discharge because of America's policies, in overt and covert, and just to say, you've damaged my mental health, United States of America. So because of that, forget the military. Mental health, I'm taking you to the court. Because in US, even till about a year and a half ago, before second term of Trump, they had trainings on microaggressions for the staff. What is a microaggression in workspace? If you ask this question, if you behave that way, you may harm the feelings of your colleague. So we will take you, you can be subject to reprimanding and, discussion with HR. How can a nation that is so concerned about microaggression in the financial institutions and corporates of America have macroaggressions around the world and have zero recourse? Where, so this case of it's enough of exceptionalism and we're a universal body and have to work together. These are things that I like to bring to as dialogue. It doesn't have to turn into a court case tomorrow.
No, you're right about it. You're absolutely right. The question is, and so far nobody has answered this, is how would we build that? How do we force the US system and the European court system open to the victims of external aggression? Obviously the answer would be through a parliamentary act, right? I mean, Congress in the U.S., the House of Commons and Lords in the U.K., and so on. They would have to make a law that actually says that hereby we acknowledge that our courts can be used for the retribution of foreign populations. Now that won't happen because the people sitting in those positions are highly aware that this would take away the ability of their states to reign with impunity, because that's what they want. And some of them more, and some of them less. But that's no institution can be expected to weaken their own freedom to do whatever they want. So the question to us as little guys on the ground, even in democracies and so on, is how do we get a process going that would force that change?
I think, like many other things, it's always about putting the thought and the idea and the question out. A lot of these things, in my opinion, are like crowdfunding. And crowdfunding, I think we need a moral funding. And we need, in my opinion, a global liability ledger that would take a look at the past aggressions and even the ones that are open out there. I mean, some of these documents are being released and, disclosed and, unclassified. So it's out there. The key question is, if you start even in Latin America alone, forget the world. I mean, if Latin America as a continent, yeah, and I'm not talking about Argentina, you put Argentina aside to say, buddy, you're our northern neighbor, you have been really wrecking our part of the neighborhood. And if the, Canadian smelter case is a precedent, can we have a dialogue? And once you have that, if you have a mechanism that say moving forward, even any interference that comes should have a retroactive compensation that would be somewhat a mechanism, at least, for prevention of some of these acts. And again, as I said, you cannot have trainings for what I say, microaggressions, but be the linchpin and the king of macroaggressions and not be held accountable. It doesn't fly. It just doesn't fly. And as I
No, Ali, the problem is it does fly. That's exactly what's going on. And the problem is it shouldn't. It shouldn't fly, but it
agree
does.
with you. I agree with you, but I think, like everything else, there is this factor of an alternative model.
Mhm.
So now, as much as we may not like China in all of its aspects, and China has all kinds of handicaps as well, but there is a big power that is competing not only on the road with BYD and Tesla, not only with DeepSeek and OpenAI, but is putting also out an alternative global security initiative, global civilization initiative, right? So the monopoly of the shining light on the hill is tilting. There's another flickering light somewhere else as well that the global south are saying, oh, that's interesting. So, would in that global security initiative, global civilization initiative, be mechanisms or spaces that, buddy, this is your balance sheet and ledger for the mess you've created over the past 70 years? Moving forward, any interference will be as such, and there should be a recourse for the global body of the communities and nations. So yeah, I think, bringing the ICJ jurisdiction automatically to UN membership. If you're a member, you cannot say, I'm conditional. I come to the club, but there are clubs in London that they don't let you in without a tie or a jacket.
And
You,
that's luckily that's already the case. I mean, any member can go to the ICJ, and the ICJ can pick those cases up. The problem is the enforcement, because if the country that is then found guilty does not enforce the decision of the ICJ, then the ICJ can escalate to the Security Council and say, Security Council, you who are the only body in the UN that has the right to use force, please enforce. And there we've got the five-power veto. That's the
exactly.
catch-22 of the ICJ.
And I think those five are in many ways, as much as they may on surface have their own dynamics, but there is, again, I think there will be room and opportunity with the realities of the day. I mean, whether again India will be part of permanent five, whether UK has to opt out or give a seat, these things not. But let us not forget that we are a byproduct of evolution. We are a byproduct of development. If Rosa Parks wouldn't stand up on the bus today, we wouldn't have, what we have, If Martin Luther King wouldn't go and talk, segregation may have continued. So ideas matter. I once heard something really interesting. It said small people talk about other people. Average people talk about events. Great people talk about ideas. So that is why neutrality studies is a good forum for everybody. And I'm just putting this out as a global class action lawsuit against United States. If I had the solution, I would have gone and started with 1953 and Mossadegh. But I think we have arrived to that point that we need to say retroactively, this is the balance sheet. This is your credit card debt or lack of credit that you've been swiping in coup d'etats, in operations, etc. Moving forward, the interest rate is shooting to the roof. People know.
And
So
the interesting thing about this is that the constitutions of many of Western states actually contain, to a very large degree, rights of the citizens against the state, to make sure that the piece of paper, the most fundamental rules of society, make sure that the state will not be able to just steamroll over the people, right? And the United States is one of those constitutions. The other one is the German basic law. They don't call it a constitution, but a basic law, which in very essentially has like important parts that say like, no, there are things that the state cannot do, and the individual actually has the right to defend itself against the state, right? So
Right.
and of course, this entire litigation part and so on is then based upon the idea that no. I mean, you can even go and sue your government if you have been mistreated, because at the end of the day, government is not the king who rules over you. It is the administration that, by the grace of your own of your own empowerment, then looks for order. But if they do stuff wrong, then you can sue them. We never opened that again to the outside. So and it is I don't mean to ask you to solve this problem, but maybe also like people who are listening, what would be the way to open it to the outside? What would be the way to make sure that Palantir can be sued for the limbs that their devices of doom blew off of people in faraway lands? Because that would change the entire calculus of these goddamn of the goddamn military-industrial complex.
Well, the irony there is, I'll come back to what we can do in a minute, but the irony is that when I see, for instance, with Invictus Games here in UK, which is for the vets, the sponsor on the side of the, really young, handsome, good-looking, healthy men who have gone to war in Iraq and come back without limbs, and then the sponsor of the games on the side is Boeing. So what I'm trying to say is that you say potato, I say potato. The MIC, or military industrial complex, of course, has a massive role in it. The key question, I think, is what sort of America are the Gen Z inheriting? What sort of America wants to be on a global stage in a multipolar world, So it's, and to your point, Pascal, again, I don't have the answer. I'm putting the idea out. The ICJ jurisdiction automatically to UN members. Expand universal jurisdiction of aggression and illegal interventions. To have that ledger, and print it. A body should print and come up with that. This is it. This is the scorecard of what has been acknowledged, disclosed, declassified. Create a global accountability index to track and publicize violations. Transparency International. I want an Aggression International.
Accountability International.
Accountability International, right? What is it? This use climate and reconstruction justice framework. I have a proposal that I say we need a global carbon conflict carbon compass and pricing. What is the tonnage of jet fuel that is used, the destruction, the mobilization of 200, 400,000 American young men and women, stationing them for 20 years, catering, destroying, taking the valuation of carbon that went into building those cities in the first place, then the coast guards and the marine fuel that they have to, and the dislocation and the soil erosion, and then the reconstruction of millions of homes, and then the aviation and jet fuel of civil aviation that have to avoid these airspace. It's mind-boggling.
Of course. It is.
Sitting there, and we are sitting there saying, Pascal, please do not use that wood log on your barbecue because you're emitting. I mean, it's just.
And if you don't switch off the lights by 8 p.m., then you're a bad person, because of you, the Amazonas is burning to hell.
It's crazy, Pascal. I think being mindful of your time in beautiful Japan and our session, I just think that, everybody's talking about AI these days. I mean, AI can help us create, a ledger or simulate the emissions. AI can help us, if AI is if AI can break the, structure of a protein, I'm sure if the will is there, we can measure the impact and simulate what has been the consequence of some of these interventions, aggressions, and wars and regime changes. But more than that, the most important thing is that we don't need just artificial intelligence. We need authentic wisdom.
Yeah.
Because without it, everything else is out of, reach. And if you remember a few months ago, the American astronauts were stranded, and Elon Musk had to step in absence of Russians' access to International Space Agency to bring them back. And that reminds me that, we are earthly human beings. So even for those who are in outer space, they want to come back. So we'd better come to coexistence and learn how to live together. And albeit the fact that it's attributed to Martin Luther King, but it was Theodore Parker who in 19th century in a sermon said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience and form what I see, and from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." So my hope is that we bend towards that, and I don't have the answer for it.
Yeah, you're right, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Also, that you brought the entire topic up, because the question to me is not the intentions of you and I and others. I know that 99.9% of people would agree that we should have such an accountability make scores and so on. The question is how to build them, because as you correctly said, right, we are one planet, 8 billion, just drifting through space. But the problem is we drift on what we've already got. So it's like we cannot start from a tabula rasa moment, and we cannot hope that God or aliens or AI just suddenly brings us the system we need. We're caught in the system we've got. And the question is like, how do we tweak the current system in order to get to a better one? And I think the thing you put your finger on is that there is already a system in place and it works inside. It doesn't work outside. It doesn't work internationally. So what's the brilliant idea? What's the one thing we need in order to kind of glue them together and make them work? And well, obviously both of us don't know, but if anyone out there knows, please do write emails. Like, what's the mechanism? How do we create that mechanism?
I think some of the best people to answer or to build on this straw man that you and I tried to build together out of these two essays are the legal community in the United States. And to say all of the people in the United States are in support or in tandem or in, I would say, seconding or confirming their government's policies, we would be naive. There are a lot of brilliant minds over there. They know their legal system better. We have seen this, from Watergate to other cases in United States and tobacco cases as well with the tobacco industry. When there is a will, there is a way. As I said, it's not our job necessarily to say it's always been like this, so it has to continue like this. And it's not our job to say, here's a magic wand. It's our job to have the conversations, to the dialogues, and to say there is a collective global mental health issue, and we cannot be penny wise, pound foolish when it comes to moral standing, and to be concerned about microaggressions and be free will with macroaggressions. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. No, it shouldn't be like that. It unfortunately is, but it shouldn't. So again, question how to fix it. But Ali, thank you very much for bringing this up. Thank you very much for putting your finger on this issue that our societies, especially in the West, have like these contradicting elements to them, very contradicting, hypocritical actually. People who want to find you, they should go to your Substack, FuturEaly. What other places are there to find you?
aliborhani.com. And if any of these subjects are of interest, I think we are at the time that, global business are a bit disoriented about, a fractured world, multipolar world, however you want to address it. So there are lessons to understand what's going to happen to our community and for businesses as well. So happy to help, aliborhani.com, or on FuturEaly, which is with one E, obviously. And thank you for giving it a shout, Pascal. And of course, would love to tune in and listen to more of your dialogues and the great job you are doing at Neutrality Studies. But if President Trump feels, having an obligation to sue BBC for a clip that was misedited, the world should have an obligation to think about a class action of all the wrongs for a better world. Where's the answer? I don't know, but let's continue the conversation.
Thank you very much for this, Ali Borhani. I'll put the links into the description. Have a very good night.
Thank you, Pascal. Bye-bye.